Composers and creators, it's Zach Heyde, and today I am answering your questions. These were questions that were submitted to me about 3 months ago, and I've only recently had a chance to look at them. I've been really busy with projects, but I want to answer these questions because there's some really good ones in here, and I think it'll be helpful towards not just the people that asked, but you all as a community. I'm gonna do my best to get through them quickly. Some of them are more in depth and some of them are kind of quick answers. But if you find this video helpful and you enjoy the content, please do me a favor and leave a like at the end of the video and subscribe for more. And if you'd like to really support me, you can check out my Patreon. So let's just jump in no particular order. I'm gonna answer these questions. The first question is, how do you deal with communicating with producers with very strong opinions about what they need? That's a really good question. The first thing to remember is that the people you're working for, this is their project. It's their vision. They have spent much more time on it than you have. Oftentimes composers get introduced into the project near the very end. And as a result, they've got, a month, 2 months, 3 months maybe. But these directors and creators have been working on these projects for years, and they have a really clear idea of what they're looking for. So the first thing is to actually respect that and not to assume that they don't know what they're talking about. I've had so many times when I've written something that I thought was really good. I've been asked for a dramatic revision, kind of dug my heels a little bit, and then, it turned out that they were actually right, that the revision that was needed was the right choice for the project. Always remember that it's not about writing the best music, it's about writing the best music for the project. In terms of some communication skills, I actually talk about this more on another video about how to communicate with collaborators. I recommend you check that out. It has some bullet points as to some techniques you can use, some non-aggressive vocabulary you can use to basically communicate more effectively and constructively. The next question is kind of a general question, which is, how do I improve my orchestration skills and what programs would I need? So like all skills, orchestration is something that takes time to develop, a lot of practice, a lot of mistakes, and some real world experience. I kind of started my orchestration journey back in 2014. I remember I was studying abroad in Vienna, and I kind of became aware that the orchestra was this pool of individual players that created the whole. I was listening to a piece by Tchaikovsky, and it just struck me. And I tried to focus in on one instrument. I think it was a clarinet. And after about 5 seconds, I realized my ear was exhausted. And so what I realized is that there's a difference between passive listening and active listening. Passive listening is listening to orchestral music that you love, kind of hovering on the melody, you can sing the melody back. Active listening is saying, I can hear what violin 2 is doing in this section and how it's supporting violin 1, and you're basically listening inside beyond just the surface level. What I would do to improve my orchestration skills is I would pull up a score. You can find lots of free public domain scores of classical music. I would listen along, read the score. The first time through, I would just kind of listen to the music and just kind of follow it with my eyes. Then the next time I would listen without the music. So just in my head, I would read the score as slowly as I needed to, isolate a section, and pay attention to what that section is doing. Another good technique you can use is to ask yourself a question when you're score studying. So let's say you're studying strings, you're looking at it, and you see this cello line that's alternating between like a bass line and then sometimes accompanying the melody. Ask yourself why. Pretend you're the composer, put yourself in their shoes and ask that question and try and come up with an answer. When you do that, even if the answer isn't exactly what the composer intended, you're developing some skills, you're critically thinking, and whatever answer you stumble upon is going to be your own unique approach to problem solving and something that you'll integrate yourself when you're doing your own orchestrations. Our next question is about stem delivery. What does that look like? What do you do? What do you not do? So for me, stem delivery has basically been a 2-mix. We call it 2-mix, and that's basically just a compilation of everything together. It's your final bounce, mixed and mastered. Then next would be your subgroup. So it'd be, if you're doing orchestral stuff, winds, strings, brass, choir, percussion, and then you can also have prelays, which are basically non-orchestral things, so strums, keys, pads, synths. In some cases, I've had to do individual tracks as well, so that's bounces of every single track, which is a bit time consuming, but sometimes people need that if they're not using the same DAW, or they need to do a really detailed mix. Super important with the delivery process and just the composing process in general is to stay organized. Make sure your file names are consistent, that they include the revision number, the project name, the cue name. Sometimes they might even include a date. My revision system is I have V1.0, so that would be version 1, a version being something that is a major change from the client. And then the 0.0 is the very first one that I do. If I make little changes like, oh, that mix wasn't very good, let me send you a new one, it would be V1.1. I group things in folders very specifically so it's easy to organize, and I've kind of got my delivery system down to an automatic process. So I have a couple macros I do in Logic that sort of bounce things out for me and then put them in folders. It's something that's, maybe not very glamorous as an art form, but when you're working on a big project and you're delivering things daily or every other day, it's really important that you're spending time automating that process and not doing it manually because it can take hours if you're not organized with it. The next question is about leitmotifs, so using themes basically. The question is, if somebody writes a whole soundtrack, would you recommend using it? And what are the main usage reasons? So the answer for that one is kind of an it depends. Leitmotifs are basically an older school format of composing, but not outdated. How to Train Your Dragon is a recent example of a score that uses plenty of themes for characters and situations. Star Wars famously used it, and it kind of originated back with Wagner and some of his operas. He would use themes for characters or concepts. It's a really great tool because you can sort of tell musically what's happening inside of the story. And so even if you're listening to the music outside of the story, you're kind of capturing little things. One of the most famous examples I can think of is the Force theme. So when you hear that theme come in, you know that something mystical and magical is happening, even if nothing's being shown on screen. The con is that in some cases it can become a little bit cliche or out of fashion to today's standards. Leitmotifs aren't things that I would use for a lot of live action, I would say, today. But it is something that I would probably incorporate in animation. You can kind of get away with that old school format in animation a little bit more because we're world building. So the music is used to support that world building. Another question I got was about VST recommendations. There are so many VSTs out there. I could talk about them forever. Currently what I'm using is Cinematic Studio Series, winds, brass, and strings. That was a recent choice for me based on my workflow setup. I am very obsessed with efficiency and making things run as smoothly as possible, and I noticed that when everything was from the same library, I would be able to use certain articulation sets and certain things so they could be recorded and played simultaneously. The balance is also just a lot better. I had to do a lot less work with my mixing, and it's just my personal choice. But there are lots of people who mix with different VSTs, they use different things, and I still will do that if I want to layer different sounds. Cinematic Studio Series, I think, is great in terms of the realism. Sometimes their programming's a little more difficult, although I think in terms of the future, they're working very hard to improve that. So I think Cinematic Studio Series is a great investment for anybody who's looking to future-proof their creative process. That said, a lot of people like Spitfire products. I will say Spitfire has a lot more of the room. They record in Air Studios, so the sound is a lot roomier, if that's the kind of thing that you like. I also have used some of Cinesamples, which I like very much as well. I think they're very consistent in terms of their sound. East-West is the most affordable choice in general, but from my experience, their sampling is a little bit on and off. Some of the stuff sounds pretty good, some of the stuff does not. So as my career's gone on, I've kind of evolved and changed libraries and adapted, and done it all gradually. You don't need to invest in the best of the best as soon as you start composing. I always encourage people to start with the resources you have and build from there. This question is about the process of writing music for a film or game. What are the steps that are actually involved? Usually things start with a brief, and after all the legal stuff is worked out in terms of the deadline, kind of the general idea of what they're looking for, the budget, then they move forward into the spotting session if it's something that has like cutscenes or something visual that you're composing to. So spotting is basically where you're working with the client or the director to kind of move through these hit points, talk about what's needed, what's not needed, where music happens and where it doesn't happen. If it's a video game, I'll say that spotting maybe would only occur with the cutscenes, and in the cases of cues, you might be getting some other forms of inspiration or media. So maybe some still images, a clip or two, or maybe in some cases even just a descriptive brief. I've had plenty of projects where I was just told, I want this to sound like a fantasy world in a forest, and just write a cue based on that. Then after that comes obviously the composing process and any necessary revisions. Typically everything happens right inside of a DAW. because the priority is giving realistic and accurate playback to the client, even if it's gonna be recorded later. Once the project is approved, then if there's anything that needs to be recorded live, it gets notated. So that DAW then goes into MIDI prep, where the MIDI is cleaned up, sent over to a notation software, and then transcribed out. An orchestrator would then take that and kind of clean it up even more, make sure that everything that's sounding in the DAW would be accurate to the way that it's gonna be played by an orchestra or by these session musicians. A copyist will then take that score and then extract it into parts for those players. It goes to a recording session where it's recorded by an engineer. And then after that, everything is sent over to be mixed and mastered. Now in a perfect world, you'd have somebody assigned to each task, and that makes it very efficient and kind of smooth flowing. But in a lot of cases with lower budget things, it's me doing most of that stuff. So I'd be the one that's mixing and mastering. I'd be the one that's sometimes recording live instruments, and things kind of scale as you go. So in the beginning, you're doing just about all of it. And then as you grow, you start to outsource and get more people involved. Many people who are not part of the film scoring scene or the media scene think that composers do it all themselves. And that's just simply not true, especially with the larger projects, these multi-million-dollar films and games. It's simply because they just don't have enough time. It's not that they're incapable of doing it, it's that they would run much more efficiently having people that are extremely skilled at a specific task doing it, instead of them trying to juggle all of these things: composing, mixing, mastering, recording, notation. It's just simply too much to handle for one person for a large project. So that is gonna do it for this Q&A. There were some really great questions in here, so thank you to everybody who asked them. If you'd like to see another Q&A, please leave me some questions in the comment section, and I'll compile the ones that I haven't answered yet and answer them in the following one. Again, I hope you'll leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. And if you'd like to support me, please do check out my Patreon. I have some incentives for those of you who can choose to support me there, including bonus content, custom Q&As, and a live stream hangout every month. Thanks again for watching, hope you found it helpful, and I will see you in the next video.